Welcome to Let's Talk About Books with Jill and Julie. My name is Jill Kenny from the Chelmsford Public Library. I'm the head of Reader Services and Programming, and this is my colleague, Julie.
I'm Julie Itron, Reference and Reader Services Librarian.
And today, what we're going to talk about is historical fiction. This is one of my favorite genres, and Julie is growing to love it. She has found a few books that she cannot stop talking about. So this is what we wanted to do today, is to focus on the books that they're our go-to. When someone asks us what kind of historical fiction book we would recommend, these are the ones that we pull out of our arsenal to talk about what ones our favorites are that we would recommend to you. And actually, why don't I let you start? Because it's one that's on my list. I haven't been able to get it at the library yet.
I know, the lists are long.
Yes.
The first book that I'm going to talk about is The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. And as you said, I'm not a big historical fiction person, but the books that I have today are three of the best books that I've read in 2024. So I actually read this one in January, and I don't know if you remember, I came into work the day after I finished it, and I said, I can't do anything today, I just have to talk about Frozen River all day long. But this book opens with a dead body frozen in the river, and Martha is called upon to examine the body. She looks at it and says, this man was absolutely murdered. However, the town has brought in this fancy doctor who's Harvard educated, and that doctor says, no, this was a natural death by natural causes. And so Martha is obviously angry and starts to investigate this cause of death herself on her own. And the man who was murdered or died happens to be someone who was about to face trial for sexual assault in the community. So it was sort of a scandalous death to begin with, and then it's also compounded by the fact that this man is supposed to stand charges, and now he won't be able to stand charges. And so it was just so riveting in terms of reading about what life was like for a woman during this time period. So I found like that aspect really, really fascinating, but also just this idea that it's very atmospheric, so it's set in winter, and it takes its name from the Kennebec River, which freezes over in the wintertime. And one of the things that I really like is at the beginning of the book, there's a map, so you can kind of pay attention to where people are going, because they're always crossing this frozen river to get either to their homes or to the community areas, the tavern, the court, that kind of thing.
Was it in a certain place in Maine, or did they travel in Maine?
No, they were pretty much very within their own community, which is set right on the Kennebec River.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, so good.
I might have to steal your copy.
You absolutely can steal my copy, yeah. And I will say, because I know that there are long library waits, I did bring a couple of read-alikes. So for patrons who are looking for historical fiction that might feel similar, there is Where the Light Enters by Sarah Donati, and also Looking for Jane by Heather Marshall. So those are two kind of read-alikes for this book while you wait for your library hold to come in.
Funny, what is it, Sarah Donati?
Yes.
I was with some friends this weekend, and one of my friends name-dropped that author.
Oh,
I
really?
had not heard of her before,
yeah.
And so that's really interesting. And she loves historical fiction, too.
Oh, all right. Okay, good.
It's a good one.
Good.
All right. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is by Fiona Davis, who is a favorite of mine. I read all of her books. This is called The Masterpiece, and all of her books focus on a location in New York City. And the location becomes a character. So this one is on Grand Central Station. And the two time periods are 1928, when Grand Central Station had an art school in it. So upstairs of the actual train station, there was this art school. So it was really kind of crazy. The fictional part about this is this character, Clara. She's a teacher. She's like 25, and she's a teacher at this school. So she is an illustrator, and basically at this time the Great Depression hits. And so it's a little bit about that, how she's trying to survive. She ends up disappearing off the map of the art world. What happens is you start to learn more about that when you learn about 50 years in the future, 1974, the other character comes into play, and this is Virginia. And she's a recently divorced woman, and she needs to take a job to make some money. Her daughter's in college, who is also a good character because she helps out at one point. So she takes her new job as an information booth attendant at Grand Central Station. Now at the time it's very different. There's homeless people in the train station, and it's not as safe as it was at one time. And so there's all this element to it, security and making sure they check places. So when she is looking to make sure things are safe upstairs, she comes across this abandoned art school. And she sees this amazing watercolor that's not signed. And she starts to investigate about it and becomes sort of fascinated about what happened to this artist. Is it this woman? Because she starts to do a little digging, and her daughter starts to help too, and they go on this quest to try to find this artist. And obviously these worlds converge. You learn Clara is involved in this in the future, and oh, it's just fabulous. The characters, it's, a great women empowerment, one more so than the other. Obviously the woman in Virginia in the 70s was a little more successful with, getting divorced and making money for herself, and Clara had to make some really tough decisions, but the Depression also played a huge role into that too. So, but if you like this one, this is, one of all of her books. Fiona Davis's books are like that, where it's a women empowerment. It's about, some other place like a hotel that was really famous in New York, or The Address is one. But the thing I also really like about this book is in the acknowledgments, in the author's note at the back, she goes into the detail of what spurred on. Like, she found letters, and they found artwork and things in this abandoned art school when they tried to, they had to go to the Supreme Court to get this they were trying to close it as a landmark, a national landmark. And so there was a whole lawsuit that went with it too. So it spurred this on and became a really great book for it. So this was a really good one. I think
that the author notes at the back are some of my favorite parts of the historical fiction books.
Yeah.
Okay, so as somebody who's not a big historical fiction reader, Fiona Davis, I know that she's a big name in the genre. If you were going to start with your first Fiona Davis book, which one would you suggest?
Masterpiece.
Oh, really? That's where you'd start?
Yep, this was one of my favorites. And then The Address was great, about one of the old hotels that was in New York City. And then there's, I have to double check, but I think she was the one who just wrote The Spectacular as well.
Yes.
Which was her newest one about the Radio City Music Hall, so that was really great. And then The Dollhouse was another one too.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you're not going to go wrong with any of them. So.
All right, good to know.
Yeah.
Good.
They're all really great. Oh, now we're going to another very highlighted author.
So this is another new one. This is The Women by Kristen Hanna, which just released, I think, in February.
Yep.
And again, I, started the year with Frozen River being one of my favorites. But a friend of mine said, I really think that you need to read The Women. And so I said, okay, fine. And I did. And it was so good. Again, I finished it and came to work and said, I need to just talk about the women all day long.
Yep.
And this is a very different setting. So now we are going to Vietnam. So we're in the late 60s. And the main character in this novel, her name is Frances McGrath. She goes by Frankie. And essentially her older brother enlists and is going to go serve in Vietnam. And she is kind of so moved by him and his friends making this decision and sort of the war efforts being spoken about that she decides she's going to enlist. And at the time, women would not enlist as soldiers, they would enlist in the Army Corps of Nurses. Right. So and she's finished nursing school, so she's trained, and she announces to her family that she too is joining the war efforts and she's going to be a nurse in Vietnam. The response from her family is very different from the response that her brother received, and that kind of sets the tone for what it's going to be like to be a woman in a war that women did not really have a huge part in. So this one is different in the sense that I think you kind of knew going into it that you were probably going to cry. Yeah. And I did ugly cry for the last quarter of the book. So I would read it and then I would put it down and my family would say this is going to be a bad one, right? I'm like, yep, it's going to be a bad one. Not to say that takes away from how good it is. It's so good. And it just tells the story of Frankie and the friends that she makes while she's serving. And again, what it's like to be a woman in a space that is predominantly held by men. I love the description of what it's like to be in a medical facility where facility is a real loose term in that there aren't even actual buildings. They're just all in tents in the jungle, essentially. And then the novel actually does not stay in Vietnam for as long as maybe you would think it would. And then she comes home. And then it is about what it is like to reacclimate to society, and especially for this war, where the soldiers that served were not well received when they came back. And then to be a woman who served, and then to be told by these same veterans, there are no women in Vietnam. And Frankie and her friends would say, we've got dog tags and fatigues that say differently. So it's the story of how Frankie really suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome, and that wasn't diagnosed for these soldiers or nurses at that time, really. It took them a while for them to have that diagnosis. And then especially for these women, they would just keep getting told over and over again, well, you didn't serve. So it was really heartbreaking, but just so well written, and I absolutely loved it, and I would recommend it to anyone with the caveat that this is a crying one. So. Right, some historical fiction is sad and some is not. Right. This is yeah.
Well, it's a tough time during our history as well. So
and I think one of the things that I really found fascinating was when I read the author's note at the end of this one, Kristen Hanna said that the United States government still cannot provide an accurate number of women who were nurses in Vietnam. And I'd say if you're on the hold list and you're waiting a long time, read alikes for this one, The Ways We Hide by Christina Morris, and then The Kinships of Secrets by Eugenia Kim, which is set during the Korean War. So a little closer to this time period. So options if you are still waiting for the women.
Wow. Wow. Or you can go to my next one, which is The Alice Network by Kate Quinn. This is my go-to. Anytime someone asks me about, I'm kind of sick of World War II books because there are so many written.
So many of them, right, for historical fiction?
So many written. And, I want something a little different or something like that. So The Alice Network is another book, because this is why I like to read, where there are two women focused on two different time periods, but they're connected. So this is, it starts out with 1947 as the main time frame that is happening. So it's post-World War II. And the main character is Charlie St. Clair, and she is an American college girl. She's from an affluent family. She is pregnant and unmarried, and her family is not having it. So they are sending her to Europe to take care of her problem. And so she is going to do that, but she is really concerned about her beloved cousin Rose, who disappeared during the war. She went over to become part of the war effort, and they don't know what happened to her. So she's using her going to take care of it problem, and she's going rogue on her parents for sure. She takes a train to London, and she starts to do some research about it, and she ends up on the doorstep of Eve Gardner. Now, Eve Gardner is in her 80s, and she is drunk, and she is angry and bitter and doesn't want to answer any questions. So then you flash back to 1915 when Eve was a young woman and she was recruited in World War I for her work as a spy. And she is then taken under the wing of Lily, who is, her code name is Alice. And so the birth of the Alice Network, which is a whole network of women spies, because they weren't, thought of as a threat. So they were trained, and they went around and they did all these things. So you learn a lot about Eve's story as you flash back and forth between the two women, and as Charlie starts to find out more information, then it goes back to Eve, and you, no surprise, but you do find out that Eve does know about Rose. Rose was in some sort of spy network at some point, and there's a lot of things that happen, like there is a driver that Eve has hired begrudgingly, and he is a Scottish love interest, as it becomes for Charlie. His name is Finn, and he is hilarious because he adds like a humor element to it all, but he's basically the driver. He starts to take them places and to figure out things, and Eve does come out of her curmudgeon-y anger and starts to try to help figure the story out. So it's so good. And then this is also one in the author's note that you find that her motivation for this story, or her research, she found letters and transcripts from women who were actual spies. And so that's sort of the birth of the story. But I also read this, but I also listened to it, audiobook, which I highly recommend because you get all of the accents. So you get the Scottish accent of Finn, and you get the environment that you hear about and all this. It was so good. The Alice Network, highly recommend it. I've literally told so many people about it.
When you listened to it on audio, was it distracting to have that time jump?
No.
Okay, because I think one of the things I'm learning about myself as a historical fiction reader is I do not like that multiple time situation.
Oh, yeah.
I think I want to just be in one era for the entirety of the book. Huh. But I also don't like perspective jumping when I read in general.
Yeah.
So
I like it when it's the same, like this setting doesn't change.
Right.
It's in Europe. Well, it does change. Sometimes it's in London, sometimes it's in France. When it takes us back to when she was a spy in France. But it's Europe.
Right.
It is just different time periods, but but it's so good. I'm not a big rereader of books, but I do want to.
Read that one, gotcha.
That one
and Kate Quinn is a big name in historical fiction as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's and this was a Reese Witherspoon book club book back in the day. Not sure which one, but yep. Great one.
All right, so my last one, most recent one that I've read, and this is James by Percival Everett. This, I think, is the only book I'm bringing today where the main character is male.
Is male?
Yes. And this is a Huck Finn retelling, but told from the perspective of Jim, who likes to go by James. That's what he likes to go by. And I really was not sure that I wanted to read this. But the friend who recommended The Frozen River and The Women said to me, I really think you need to read James. And so I said, fine, I will You haven't steered me wrong yet, so I will read James. And I started it, and I was like, I don't know. And then we reached the point in the story where the author introduces the concept that all of these slaves are actually very well educated, but they are playing that they are unintelligent because that is what their slave owners expect of them. And as soon as I hit the scene where James is teaching his children how to talk like a Negro, as he says, because this is what the white people expect us to be like, I was like, I am in. I'm so hooked on this. And so it is really about James's journey. And he does go with Huck, and so there are some elements that are the same. But essentially, his family is sold, and he wants to try to become free so that he can then go back and get his family. So the journey on the raft and up the river is to escape the fact that he's a runaway slave, you know, and people are looking for him, right, so that he can go north and get freedom so that then he can go back and get his wife and his children. I won't spoil all the details because there are definitely some rewriting of the Huck Finn narrative, but the writing is so beautiful. I mean, this is being talked about as a potential for a Pulitzer, and I would love to see that happen because it's just so beautifully written. And I would just read passages out loud to no one because no one was there, but I just wanted to hear the words because they're written on the page. They're just absolutely perfect. So it's just such an excellent book. And just the idea of like the character of Huck Finn being a boy, so I think he's about 12, right, when his original story was written, and he's about 12 in this book too. And that as they're on this journey, James cannot keep up the front, so to speak, and Huck calls him out on it because Huck is probably one of the only people who really listens to James. And so then, you know, Huck is upset because he said, what else haven't you told me? Like, I thought we were friends. And, you know, obviously it's so heartbreaking to read that kind of first-person description of what it was like to be owned and to be someone's property and to be treated the way that these slaves were treated. And really all they want is their freedom. And this is obviously set right about the time of the Civil War starting. So it's really just a story of James and Huck together against the world, so to speak.
Wow.
Yeah, so good.
Wow. I wonder what it would be like to listen to it.
I would love, I definitely am going to reread this, and I would love for the chance to listen to it just so I can hear that. And I'll confess, I listen to audio at like 1.8 speed, but I think I would listen to this at regular speed just so I could hear those words. So gorgeous.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, again, another one to add to the list.
Right. And if you can't get this one, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver is what they say is a good read-alike for James. So, because you're going to have to place holds on all of mine and then wait for them to come in.
Yeah, of course. I know.
Yeah.
Well, mine is a complete opposite. For my last book, this is a brand new book, and I'm going to see the library copy. It's a little shiny, but it's called The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. It's by Natasha Lester, and she is an Australian author, but she writes a lot about Paris. Yeah. So this is mainly in Paris, but also in New York City. So this is haute couture, historical fiction, and a little different from my other two, focuses on 3 women. And it takes you to 3 different time periods, and all about the haute couture world in different places. So the way that they're connected is it's 3 generations of women. So the earliest character is Misa Bricard, and she's an actual person. So she is the the oldest, or the grandmother situation. Her child is Astrid. So Astrid Bricard is her daughter, who she's grown up in the 70s, and she is with Hawk Jones. So they are both fictional people. They're loosely based on Anne Klein and Halston, and they're not. It's not their story, but this is the sort of based on the way they were at the time. Astrid is a design student in a fashion school, and Hawk is someone who was at the school very briefly and then took his line took off, and so they fall in love, and it's them struggling to try to balance all of this. She gets pregnant with Blythe, who is the main time frame of current time, and basically the whole disappearance piece, as the title goes, is there's a very famous thing that happens in 1973. It's called Battle of Versailles. And it's the European designers versus the American designers. This is something that actually happened. What did not happen was Astrid is a fictional character.
Right.
She went as to be the only woman who was invited to be a part of this battle, which the truth of that part is that Anne Klein was invited, and she was given a very hard time about the press, really. There's John Fairchild is the real press person in the book. He was the editor of Women's Wear Daily, and he was notorious for making people and destroying people. And that's a quote from many of the people in the fashion industry. So he's a huge character in this book as well, because one of the reasons why she disappears is because she basically couldn't see an out, as far as she didn't think she was going to be able to keep going and be the designer that she wanted to be, with the press just taking advantage of her and kind of ruining her. So the Blythe, the daughter of the two of them, is trying to find out. Her marriage is falling apart. She's also a designer, but the fact that her mom disappeared and left her is part of the problem. So she wants to find out what happened. So it keeps you going. It's hard to put down. It's fabulous. So highly recommend. And this is a new one. It just came out maybe in January,
right.
I think. So.
And I read it because you loved it so much.
And
I loved it,
okay.
Yes. Yeah. My favorite parts were definitely that the 1970s like height of decadence, and I kept saying I wish the author described the scenes and the clothes and the atmosphere so vividly that you almost expected to turn the page and see the photographs, because photographs are such like an important part, because they're always being taken. These photographs are always being taken of them, and then they refer back to these photographs. And it was like, oh, I should be able to see this. You know, like there's that reference to the silver lame dress. And I kept saying, I can see it. Like I just want to turn the page and have it be there. So yeah, it was really good. I was a little thrown for a loop when we did go back to World War II. It was like, wait, but no, what happened?
I know.
So,
well, and that was the three timelines was a lot, but I thought it worked pretty well because it didn't like take you there for too long.
No, and actually, once I was there, I was very interested in what was happening. It was just more that, you know, in that moment, I was very much, you know, we were in Studio 54, and then suddenly we were like in the catacombs of France.
Right.
Yeah. So
it was a lot.
Yeah.
And then in a vineyard, or the, you know, trying to find people. So yep. But it was fabulous. Well, we want to thank you for joining us, and what's our catchphrase?
Check us out.
Check us out. Have a good day.